Chapter 92 to 94, Interlude. As she sat alone in her husband's quarters, she allowed herself time to reflect. Her mistakes and triumphs, she could see everything that had led her to this moment. It was not often she reflected. To look back was to become lost in old fears and losses. To remember her father as he was brought grief and relief in equal measure. She hated it. He would have made her a puppet, used her children to further himself. She had not always felt this way about him. Once she had loved him as fiercely as any daughter should love her father. That had changed when he had brought her to the capital with him all those years ago. The old king, wise even at his advanced age, had feared the influence of Corlys Velaryon. That grasping snake had gotten so close to the throne, seducing a woman young enough to be his granddaughter in the process. Jaehaerys was more cunning by half though. His chosen heir was not the woman Corlys had despoiled but Viserys, son of Baelon, and to make sure that point was hammered home to the sea snake he'd invited father to ensure Viserys would have support beyond the Vale Lords. Even with 3 dragons to Viserys 1, Corlys would not be able to seize the throne with the might of the high tower at Viserys' back. Her father had bade her to get close to the king, to care for him in his dotage. She had and in turn, Jaehaerys had cared for her. He'd asked how she was, asked after her hobbies and interests, and as he'd grown more addled by his illness, even mistaken her for his own daughter. That was how a father was supposed to be, she had realized then. They were supposed to see you as something more than a mere plaything. More than a tool to advance themselves. Closeness to the king had brought her into the Targaryen family itself. Hindsight told her that this was what her father had wanted above all. Her father had been so proud when she had gotten closer still, securing a new place after Jaehaerys had died by the princess's side as one of her ladies. Rhaenyra had been so small then. So eager to give love and desperate to be loved in return. She had been Aemma's only child in a decade of marriage, and father had wanted her close enough to snare Viserys in the event of Aemma's death even then. She unclenched her hands as her nails caused pain to bloom across her palms. How much would have changed if she had just done as father had asked? If she had not caught the eye of Daemon Targaryen? If she had not fallen under his sway? He had been like a dream then. A dashing prince interested in her. They had ridden together, hunted together and hawked together. He had flattered her, read her poetry and told her the funniest tales. He had told her she looked almost Valyrian. That he was attracted to her because of that. He flattered her, told her she could almost be Rhaenyra's mother in truth with how similar they looked at times. He'd told her she could be Jaehaerys' daughter in truth when she had confessed her deepest desire to him. She had begged her father to pursue an annulment for him, begged to be married to him. Her father had been furious at Daemon's interference, doing all he could to see Daemon humbled. She had gotten angry with him. She had not understood then, not truly, what the prince was. She had been in love and she had wanted to force the matter. She had given herself to him. He had taken her maidenhead. Her most happiest moment. Her life a downward spiral since. She'd peaked at 5 and 10. The rest seemed like some sort of nightmare. Some sort of punishment. Experience told her he'd only wanted her for the potential annulment, and when that was not forthcoming, he'd become restless. His eye had wandered from her and found a Lysene whore. She, a daughter of the High Tower, usurped by a mere whore. After he'd killed the men she'd sent to remove the problem, he'd killed her childhood for good measure. He'd revealed it was all lies. He'd called her the plainest of undulls. He'd dismissed her as some empty-headed chit. He'd boasted about what he'd done to her father. Her father's fury could have put Viserys to shame. He'd been on the verge of sending her home when Queen Aemma had died. Then her shame did not matter because Daemon was gone and she could be made queen. All she had to do was make Viserys love her. Daemon had given her the tools to do so. She had taken every lesson he'd taught her and brought it to bear on his brother. It was to be her revenge. Daemon would hear of the marriage and know. It had been enough to calm her father's fury but not enough regain his trust or earn his pride once again. He'd told her to stay on her back and produce heirs. Nothing more. Nothing less. How angry he'd been when she had done all he asked, made herself the puppet he wanted, and Viserys had claimed Rhaenyra as his heir first and foremost despite the son she'd given him. Not as angry as she had been though. She had put aside everything she was, played the good and doting wife, and her son was still being denied his birthright. He would not have set aside a son that the Velaryon bitch had given him. That another Valyrian, another dragon, had given him. Her son, who should be king, was being set aside for his sister. As if she were a lesser wife than Aemma Arryn. Aemma Arryn who had looked as undull as she had. As if her son was lesser than Rhaenyra. Hateful, arrogant Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra who would rather the girl barely 3 years her senior play at being her mother than the woman who had half raised her. Arrogant, ungrateful. She took a deep breath. Rhaenyra was all too happy to be placed before her sons. Oh, Viserys liked to protest she had pushed for Aegon to be made heir, and Rhaenyra loved to play the proud older sister, but she knew better. Rhaenyra wanted the throne. She would sooner die than give it up to its rightful occupant. She was a usurper in all but name, and not even the Seven seemed to want to punish her. Everything seemed to favor her. Viserys was seemingly blind to the Valerian whore and her bastard spawn. Rhaenyra had somehow persuaded her sword-swallower husband to get her with trueborn children. Somehow getting him to give her twins. It was all so unfair. Unfair and wrong. And Viserys acted as if she were in the wrong. As if, by trying to protect her son's birthright, she was the villain. He'd locked her up. Like she was some kind of criminal. Guilt slithered through her veins at that, and she fought to control herself once more. It had been Larys that had saved everything. He had saved her life, her father's life, her brother's life, and likely her children's too. The tears of Lys had been an expensive poison. Completely traceless. It would have been simple to ensure it ended up in Rhaenyra's juice. No one else drank it when wine was available, and Melas did not know enough to spot it. No one would have ever known. Just another girl dead in childbirth. She had forgotten about Rhaenyra's maester. Larys had not. So he'd poured a king's ransom in gold down a drain and told her not to be so foolish. Rhaenyra's death would mean nothing if her own came on its heels. She knew he was right. Viserys would see Rhaenys and her children take the throne before Aegon should she be implicated in Rhaenyra's murder. He had been right. She did not know who had killed Alice Strong, but when she found them, she would kill them slowly. Was it luck that saw the girl dead on the night she had picked for Rhaenyra to die, or had the assassin been seeking to mask one murder with another? Who could have known her intentions beyond her own loyal Greens? It did not matter. She would have the truth eventually. Larys was a clever man. He would deliver the culprit to her. He said, and she agreed, that her father had been killed by the same conspirator. One eager for war and unwilling to go along with his plans. In the meantime, the rest of the court could wail about the Dornish. She alone would avenge her father. The slam of a door had her looking up. Her husband stood before her, smiling widely. She returned it with practiced ease. "My queen," he said by way of greeting. His happiness lit his entire face up. It was easier to play the loving wife now that he no longer resembled some fat fool in a mock crown. A shame that he insisted he would not grow a beard. Another testament to a dead woman she would always come second to. Queen Emma had been well fond of that ridiculous mustache. "Alicent, are you well?" he asked, concern radiating from him when she did not answer straight away, tongue held still by memories of the past. She blinked the tears from her eyes. Her father was dead. The child she had so loved had become a hate-filled woman. Her children were all she had left. She would deliver them what was theirs by right. "I am fine, my love." Merely overwhelmed. She would honor her father's last advice to her. His sacrifice had given her the keys to save herself. She would stay by her husband's side. She would play the tamed and meek good queen. She would play nicely with Rhaenyra. And in the darkness, Larys and her would rebuild the Greens. They would destroy the Blacks. Time was on her side. Her father's final gift. Her second chance. She would not waste it. "I quite understand," her husband told her, smiling as he took her hand. "But another child? Truly we could not be more blessed. A babe. Good gods, she was pregnant again. I should have known making it through an entire meal without her usual sniping was an indication she had something up her sleeve. This was her plan then, the plan that would ensure she would stay by my father's side. He would not send her away if she was once again expecting his child. A more selfish part of me was keen to point out that in the future the babe will be one more marriage to secure an alliance for the Greens." Father beamed at us all, and it seemed my siblings were each digesting that news in their own way. Aegon looked cautiously excited. Helena was frowning as if something had worried her, and Aemond was, in typical Aemond fashion, glaring at his shoes. That was interesting and worrying in equal measure. Jane's letters had mentioned Helena's nightmares a few times during her stay in the Vale of Arryn. Much less than the amount she received after first coming into my care, but still undeniably present. Had she seen this babe? Was that why she was worried? As for Emond, I knew he was not fond of Daeron. Did he perceive this new babe in the same way? And what did I feel for this babe? Independent of his or her role in Alicent's scheming? Another sibling, younger than the twins, would he try and insist they get along like he had done Jacaerys and Daeron in the original timeline? I put aside the worry in my gut and smiled with joy I did not truly feel. A new babe, father. You both have my congratulations. I gave Alicent a polite hug and then turned to Viserys and promptly nearly had my ribs broken as he pulled me close. I'm glad you're excited for him, he muttered into my ear. You make so proud with your love for your siblings. Him, father. The babe has not even quickened. It could yet be a girl. I said, pulling away and trying to hide how good it felt to have his pride. He was so much like the man I remembered from my childhood now. Physically fit and not wasting away like he had been since his marriage to Alicent and Aegon's birth. A girl or a boy? I care not, he laughed. I confess that I wish for a girl this time, said Alicent, smiling fondly at Helena, who beamed back. Perhaps absence does make the heart grow fonder because I distinctly remember many arguments about archery and me before she left for the Vale. You must look after them all in the coming months. They will need their big sister, Viserys said, catching my arms in his hands. Judging by the dark look that flickered over Alicent's face briefly, she was not of the same opinion. It goes without saying, I told him, trying to hide my amusement at Helena's preening under her mother's gaze. Thank you, Rhaenyra, Alicent said as Aegon decided he'd had enough of letting me steal his thunder and pressed closer to his mother, looking curious. She let him place a hand on her stomach. Emond was quick to copy him, looking unconvinced. We watched as Aegon bent low and whispered something only Emond could hear. Given that whatever it was had Emond changed from unconvinced at the prospect of a new sibling was a good one to determined. It was somewhat adorable to see his little face scrunch up as he nodded. Perhaps you can even get her one of those midwives. Viserys chuckled and Alicent actually twitched. Honestly, I didn't think people did that. Maybe the girl that delivered your twins. She knew her stuff. Alanis has returned to Dragonstone, father, I told him. I had been sad to see her go, but if my newest midwives could boast they had been trained by the woman who delivered Luke and the twins, they'd be in a lot higher demand. We are opening up a small school. Truly, said Alicent, sneer in place. I wonder how many would truly want a midwife. We have maesters for a reason. I did not take the bait. Father would likely start sulking if we started bickering at the dinner to announce Alicent's pregnancy, even if we had gotten through the actual meal without it devolving. Instead, I smiled at her as if she had merely asked the weather or the time. A fair few already, I told her, before turning to my siblings. And what do you feel about having a new brother or sister? Excited, said Aegon, pulling away from his mother's stomach. I hope he's a brother. Then I can teach him and Daeron how to fight. You can teach me how to fight, sulked Emond, prompting his brother to thump him in the arm. He raised those sulky eyes to mine. Will he cry a lot like Daeron? Possibly. Hopefully not as much as Jocelyn. He tilted his head at that. Aegon and Emond had yet to meet the twins after all. The prospect should not make me nervous, yet it did. They were children, they would not harm them. Jocelyn cries all the time, Helena informed her brothers. Except when I'm holding her. She doesn't even stop crying for Lady Lena. I tried my hardest to suppress the chuckle that prompted. Helena had not realized she was not the twins' only aunt until recently. Since that realization, she was determined to be recognized as the better of the two. She turned those wide violet eyes to me and I rewarded her with a smile of pride. She grinned in response. She was missing a tooth. When had she lost that? But I want a sister. Then I can be like Rhaenyra to her. Ah, that was genuinely touching in a way. I scooped her close and she giggled as I rearranged her on my knee. Will he have to go away like us? Asked Emond plaintively, and Alicent and I both froze at that. Or will he stay and Daeron get sent away? We did not send you away, Emond, said Viserys gently. It is a fostering. It is to help you learn and grow up. Do you not like Riverrun? I like Casterly Rock. Helena likes the Gates of the Moon. It seemed Aegon was becoming something of a peacekeeper. Although I really did not miss the nervous looks Alicent kept shooting Viserys' way. My bet was on Emond's bad behavior being the result of Alicent winding him up. Still, with everything that had happened since, I truly couldn't see him blowing up at that if it did come out. There aren't any dragons at Riverrun. Of course that's his reason. Then he turned that sulking face to me. You said I could not have a dragon when I was 5. I am 6 now. Helena was 6 when she got Morgul. I said your mother said you could not have a dragon, I replied, grateful I'd reserved myself a get out all those months ago. A spasm of amusement crossed my father's face, but he hid it with a cough. Alicent did not bother to hide her look of annoyance. Can I have a dragon now? Emond asked her. She looked to both of us for help and found none before she slumped in defeat and sighed. If your father or sister is willing to take you to the drag dash. I want a big one, he demanded, interrupting her. No, Alicent's reply was fast and final. Unfortunately, Emond had not got that message. Why? I want a big one like Vagr. I don't want a small one like Frost. He complained, actually stamping his foot. A big dragon would require you going to Dragonstone. It is incredibly dangerous. If you want a dragon, you will have settle for going to the pit and claiming one there, I told him, backing Alicent up. She shot me a grateful, if puzzled, look. She should honestly not be that puzzled. The biggest dragon on Dragonstone was Vermithor. I am not letting Aemon Targaryen, potential future war crime extraordinaire, get his hands on the Bronze Fury. But I am 6, he argued as if it were the most flawless argument in the world. Alicent raised her eyes to the ceiling and Viserys remembered he was the boy's father and that if he did not want a flambéed son, he'd better get involved. Your sister and mother are right, Emond, he said gently. If you want a dragon now, you must have one from the pit. And if I want a big dragon, he asked, frown on his face. You must be 6 and 10. That's not fair, shouted Emond, glaring at his father. Honestly, it was stroke of genius. There was no way he'd wait that long. He might say he would but give him enough time to see his siblings all mounting their own dragons and him stuck on the ground, I'll bet he'll change his tune. There is always Dreamfire, my love, said Alicent gently. No, cried Helena and we all turned to look at her. Her eyes flickered to me for a second and I frowned. Dreamfire is small. That did it, Emond screwed his face up. Meanwhile, my mind churned. That had to be dream-related, right? She'd also looked at me. Was that because she knew I'd know it was dream-related or because the dream had something to do with me? Or did she just think the damn dragon was bad luck? Then I don't want Dreamfire, he decided. I'll wait until I'm 6 and 10 and then you have to let me have a big one. Alicent shot a smile at her husband for his genius idea. He beamed back and then nodded solemnly at his second son. Of course, son. If you wait until you are 6 and 10, I shall give you everything you need to traverse the Dragonmont, he said warmly and Emond nodded. Don't worry Emond, if you need to fly I'll take you, said Aegon. Generous for a 9-year-old whose dragon was yet to be able to fly. Maybe Rhaenyra can fly us about on Syrax, suggested Helena and hopeful stares turned towards me. Your sister will be far too busy in the coming weeks, warned Viserys. She will be taking the reins of the capital from me as the war council gets underway. Honestly, he makes it sound like he works his arse off every day just to keep the city running. He doesn't, I should point out. I know he doesn't because I followed him around for 4 years. I know how much work he does and I'm willing to bet he's offloaded even more of it in recent years directly onto poor Lionel's back. Still, it was a boon to my cause. Even if I was still refusing point blank to move back to the keep until I knew who had killed Alice Strong and tried to kill my twins. Oh, will you make people complain with forms? Asked Aegon and the question threw me for a loop. It made Viserys roar with laughter though, startling us all. She already does. I got her working on that before she had the twins, he laughed. Even Alicent smiled at that. Her hold on the administration had vanished with Joffrey's hard work but she was still nominally in charge of it and it did make her life easier on more occasions than not. Having decided that talking about bureaucracy was not for him, Aegon moved back to his mother and laid a hand on her belly once more. Another little sibling for you, she said gently. You will look after them, won't you? Aegon nodded solemnly and she smiled at him, pulling him close to her. I will, mother. Just like I'll look after my sisters and Emond and Daeron. And the twins, he promised, then turned to me and asked. When can I see the twins? Helena has seen them. I did not think it prudent to fling them at you before you had settled back in, I replied before Viserys could. But you are welcome to visit them anytime you wish. Please do not visit them anytime you wish. Can we? He asked his mother, who managed her usual look. Of course. I'm sure the twins will be very glad to see you, she said warmly. She's getting good at this faking business. You'll have to spend a lot of time with them anyway when the banners are called, said father, smiling at the picture of familial bliss we were managing to form. Wait, what? When he saw our confused faces, he elaborated. I'm not bloody well taking my sons into a war zone, and neither are the Lannisters or Tullis. They shall stay here with you, Rhaenyra, he grumbled. Well, minus Helena of course, but I believe Lady Jane is staying here for some time anyway. They shot excited looks at each other at that and were soon huddled together in the corner, likely gleefully planning to make my life a misery once I was in charge of two of them. With Rhaenyra? Asked Alicent, smile sharp and voice pitched low so the children did not hear it. And where shall I be, husband? Heedless of the obvious danger, Viserys smiled at her. You shall be getting ready for birth, my love. She started to relax at that. Unwisely, as it turns out, because Viserys had one more clarification to make. On Dragonstone. I decided the kids looked tired and herded them out a few seconds later, keen to avoid whatever argument that would provoke. It was with some amount of relief I finally let myself into the manse. A maid was quick to attend to me, looking harried. I made sure to thank her for her help and slipped her a silver moon for her troubles. A moon was more than any servant had any right to expect, a copper star was more in line for a tip, but I wanted to be seen as generous and very unbetrayable. Although, I reflected as she led me through the manse, it does beg the question as to why she is so on edge. I could not recall ever seeing any of the staff here so stressed. She showed me to the drawing room and I got my answer. Lena's armor had evidently arrived and she was making her unhappiness with the fact very clear to anyone within earshot. I feel like I can't move in it, she complained as her mother fussed over her. You can move just fine, her mother snapped back, fussing over straps and adjusting where the plate Saturday, move your arm up a little. Lena caught my eye as she did as she was told, giving me a long-suffering look and rolling her eyes as Rhaenys finally noticed my presence. Stubborn as a mule, she said, stepping back from her daughter, who gratefully lowered her arm. What do you think? I bit my lip without meaning to. Her armor was similar to Laena's, inspired by the Valyrian style and embossed with the seahorse of House Valerion. That combined with her height. Lena was tall for a woman in Westeros. The effect was striking. It's I swallowed. You look fine. Very intimidating. I think I have a problem when it comes to pretty Valerians in armor. Gods, she was magnificent. She looks better than fine, he mother said, completely ignoring the look of utter betrayal Lena shot me. She wears it better than half your father's so-called knights. All that's missing is the sword, I murmured, and Lena finally got why I was so intent on her if the blush was anything to go by. I think I am a little too old to start learning to use a blade, Rhaenyra, she stammered, flustered and desperately trying to hide it from her mother. There are many swordsmen that do not start until they are older. I confess your 22 would be unusually old, but with a good enough tutor you certainly wouldn't be appalling, Rhaenys mused. I don't even think it's necessary. I'm hardly going to be fighting alongside the men, she insisted. But the Dornish do not always fight fair, daughter. What have I always said a dragon's greatest weakness is? Asked Rhaenys. It's Ryder, we both dutifully chorused and she nodded. Still, you are right. You need only defend yourself, she said, smiling broadly at us. Do you still have the knife I gave you? I sensed Lena did not roll her eyes through sheer force of habit, but I didn't miss the corners of her mouth twitching. Yes, mother, she mock-sighed, fighting a smile. Surprisingly enough, I still know how to use it as well. I shall be the judge of that. Lena's amused expression became one of worry at her mother's declaration. Alas, a mother's duty calls. Have fun, Lena. I laughed, not bothering to hide my own amusement with her predicament. If I stuck around for much longer, I'd probably get roped into those sessions too. I did not want to be awoken before dawn any more than I already was. Jocelyn was awake when I stepped into the nursery, babbling away to herself. When she saw me loom over her, she stopped in favor of giving me a broad smile instead. I ran my hands through her black hair and coaxed her into taking her meal after she'd decided she'd much rather attack my braid. After, I sat with her for a while in my arms, staring down at her face. She, for her part, seemed quite content to stare up at me, her hand stuffed into her mouth. Then her fist was removed and she smiled up at me, swiping at my face. That caused a smile so broad it hurt my face in response, and I caught her small fist in my hand. Predictably, she tried to drag my hand back to her mouth so she could chew on it. I love you so much, I told her. She didn't understand, but I had to say it or else it would swell up inside of me and burn its way out eventually. Reluctantly, I placed her back inside the crib and scooped up Alice. She did not smile, although she did let out a murmur of protest at being awoken. It did not surprise me she was asleep, and I stamped down on the usual worry. She reacted well enough when I read to them both in the evening. She was just tired right now. "Hello," I said to her brightly. "I'm sorry I woke you up. I know, it's terrible. You need to eat though." "You do." I kept up the almost nonsensical babble as she fed and kept her for a little while longer, as I had done Jocelyn. Like I had spotted the day she came out of her tank, the maids also reported her being slow to, well, do the normal baby things. Slow to support her own head, slow to develop any upper body strength. The missed and delayed milestones stretched on and on. Laner was as worried as I was. What would I do if she hit a point where she no longer improved? No, I know what I would do. I would love her and care for her no matter what. What would Westeros do? I would sooner kill Alicent than see her use my own babe against me. I would feed any that mocked her to Syrax. My beautiful Alice. My perfect Alice. I sang as she fussed in my arms. Eventually sleep took her again. They always slept for a while after their feedings. In fact, they were close to making it through the night now. I certainly slept better in any circumstance. It was some time later that I left them dozing in the nursery and made my way back down to where the Valerians had gathered. All wearing armor in some form or another. I actually had to stop and do a double take. Corlys was lightest armored out of all of them. His usual almost flamboyant sailor's garb replaced with mail and a gambeson in his house colors. I might have stared a beat too long, gods, it was easy to see what Rhaenys saw in the man. Rhaenys herself was every inch the Targaryen princess in black enameled armor embossed with the three-headed dragon of our house. That did catch me by surprise. The last time I'd seen her resort to Targaryen colors, her son had just told her he was gay, her daughter had revealed she was carrying a bastard, and I had told her all about those lovely boys Corlys had been keeping in Hull. I should probably check in on Adam, Alan, and their mother at some point. I have no clue what they're doing. Well, I said as they turned in varying degrees of surprise. I feel underdressed. That turned surprise into annoyance from Lena, amusement from Corlys and Rhaenys, and exasperation from Laenor. He was as handsome as ever in his armor. Okay, I really do have a problem. Don't worry, I'll have you some made up at some point, Rhaenys promised as I dropped down next to Lena. My lover was doing a remarkable job of appearing very uncomfortable and almost robot-like in her movements. A wicked kind of glee went through me, and I decided to have some fun. You know, aren't these things made for comfort and maneuverability? I asked, and was rewarded with her jaw clenching in annoyance. Valyrian style is, said Rhaenys, catching on to my game. Probably because of the smirk I was directing at Lena, who was steadfastly refusing to meet my gaze or acknowledge my presence. Laenor can do laps around the garden in it, I said, to no one in particular. My husband rolled his eyes and shot his sister a sympathetic look. I could just see a frown forming on her face at the angle I was at. Ha! When I was your age I could do acrobatics in it, boasted Rhaenys. It's awkward, Lena finally said, taking the bait. You'll see soon enough. I'm sure I will. Why are you all in armor anyway? I asked as Lena went back to looking vaguely disgruntled with the world. Lena here has never worn it in her life and needs to get used to it. My boy is putting his on in solidarity. Rhaenys told me. And I've been told in under no circumstances is my usual fare acceptable to take to war, grunted Corlys, fond smile on his face as he gazed at the back of his wife's head. And yourself, Rhaenys? I asked. She brought a hand up to the breastplate and tapped the dragon. New armor, she said cheerfully. I'm going to make sure the Dornish know a woman called Rhaenys Targaryen is responsible for their defeat. Mother has been giving her opinion on the strategy one have come up with, said Laenor as Rhaenys nodded. It's been quite helpful in regards to the dragons. I still say we should show them the same treatment the Conqueror gave them, she grumbled. Then she caught my look and smiled. But I understand your concerns well enough. It's still a work in progress, but we have a rough outline of the strategy we will present to the king. 3 armies for 3 dragon riders. Mother will be staying with your father in the main army, he said. I'll be with the force that will push through the Bone Way until the main force makes for Sunspear, then Lena will take my place after her forces push through Prince's Pass. I understood precisely 0 of that, but Corlys and Rhaenys were beaming with pride, so I smiled and nodded along. I think he picked up on my confusion though because he brought his hand over his mouth to fight his amusement. See? You need not chase us down on Syrax and smear mercenaries all over the roads, teased Lena. No nausea troubled me at the memory of those men I'd killed, and I felt guilty that I didn't feel guilty anymore. I had been shocked and horrified when I'd first done it, and now, all I could see was how necessary the action was. Or playing courier and catching a fever, said Laner dryly, and realized his mistake a moment later, his eyes going wide. A fever? You caught a fever in the Vale? Said Rhaenys, disbelieving. I shot Laner a glare, but he was too busy focusing intently on one of the wall hangings. You never told us of this. Was there a plague after all? It was a trifling thing. I was fine afterwards. I protested only for Rhaenys to rise from her seat and seize my shoulder. If we get fevers, it's because they're dangerous. Or they were caused deliberately. Which one was it? She asked, not letting me evade eye contact. From just over her shoulder, Lena looked similarly intent. The maester says it was one of the worst he'd ever seen. I mumbled in defeat, and Rhaenys let go of my shoulder to stalk about the room in some sort of rage. Not that I understood why. She had not been my biggest fan at that point in my life. Even Viserys trying to strangle me had not provoked this reaction. And you have had no repeat since? She asked finally. None. I told her. I have been perfectly healthy except for the birthing sickness. And no one else got ill? She asked. I frowned at her method of questioning before I realized she was likely trying to convince me I had been poisoned. No one else was ill, I confirmed, then cut her off before she could continue. But Lady Rhea questioned every member of her staff. There was no poisoning attempt. And how do you explain a fever able to take a Targaryen, and only a Targaryen? She shouted, and I recoiled back into my seat. She took a deep breath, heedless of her son and husband watching her with wide eyes, and continued at a lower volume. That doesn't happen, Rhaenyra. Not naturally. How are you so certain? Because it was me touching things I should not have been touching was the answer, but, well, maybe I could tell her that. Magic was hardly the unknown, it was in the canon timeline. After all, everyone but Corlys in this room rode massive fire-breathing dragons. Why should they be surprised at a castle that had ignored erosion for centuries due to runes set into the foundations? I can be relatively certain, I said slowly, and Laner dropped his head into his hands and groaned in despair. I know that tone, he said when we turned to him in askance. That's the tone she uses when she did something she isn't proud of. When she knows no one will approve. Rhaenyra, said Lena, turning back to me. What did you do? I ferried Lady Rhea to Runestone. Gunthor had fouled something up, a property dispute I think, but the point was I had nothing to do for the day, so I decided to solve a little mystery, I explained. Runestone completely ignores the erosion of the cliffs. If you must know, I did try the less dangerous way to investigate first. Laner gave a disbelieving snort. I asked around and I raided the Maester's library, and I discovered a legend that Brandon the Builder had built Runestone. I started, but, surprisingly, it was Lena that interrupted me with excitement in her tone. And he weaved spells into the foundations of Winterfell. You saw the same in Runestone? Our noses were practically touching as she leaned forward, eyes bright. Yes, actually, I replied, trying not to blush in front of Rhaenys. She fell back with a smile. Anyway, I ended up touching them, and it was like I was suddenly cold. Oh, so cold. Then Syrax dived me into the water, and that's when I got the fever. My explanation was finished somewhat lamely as Rhaenys' eyebrows climbed higher on her face. Corlys looked unconvinced, Laner looked puzzled, and Lena looked excited. Runes and magic, said Rhaenys finally. 7 help me. That was the last she said on the matter, bar the occasional suspicious look. We discussed Laner's plans some more, and Lena managed to gradually relax in her armor, even if she did still look miserable as she trailed me back to my room afterwards. Still uncomfortable? I asked with sympathy as she halted in the middle of the room looking like a cat that had been forced to wear socks. I can't imagine ever being comfortable in this, she whined. Mother is going to make me wear it until I can walk on my hands in it. I feel ridiculous. I hid my amusement at that image behind my hand, but she did not notice as she forged onward. And she says I must braid my hair. There will be no time to style ringlets in Dorne, she complained, imitating her mother's voice. I do not look good with braided hair, Rhaenyra. Then she noticed my evident amusement and sighed, her eyes flickering closed. I took pity on her and raised my hands to her face, drawing her in for a kiss. You could look good in rags, I told her. The armor and the braid has no complaints from me. She leaned against me for a moment and I moved to rest my head in the crook of her neck. Finally she opened her eyes and her face took on a chagrined look. I noticed your lack of complaints about the armor, she said dryly. In front of Mother. I snickered in response to her grumbling. How about I get you out of that armor? I murmured, putting as much suggestion as possible into the question. She definitely got the message as she went bright red again. You're teasing me, she groused after a moment. Not so. The offer is entirely genuine. For all that I kept my tone light, my heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. It would be another step in our relationship. A big step. She bit her lip in response, blush fading into a pink dusting across high cheekbones. Well, she finally said. I could do with some help. I awoke early the next morning before dawn, pleasantly sore and happy beyond measure. I lay there for a moment, bathing in the warmth of Lena's arms around me. Then the knock that had awoken me sounded again and I was forced to pull myself free. The pre-dawn chill saw me throwing on my precious, looted robe in Valerian colors. Lena did not stir as I moved about and I did not bother to hide my smile as I arranged the sheets over her. The maid outside let me know that the babes required feeding and not even that could dull the satisfaction I felt. Feeding them was easy enough and peaceful enough. Jocelyn seemed as sleepy as I was and Alice was her usual quiet self. Afterwards, I sat with them in the darkness until both had surrendered to sleep and then returned to my own rooms. Lena awoke as I climbed back into bed. Just feeding the twins, I assured her, but I doubt she heard what I said because a moment later she'd pulled me close again and was back in the land of sleep. It took me longer to drift off once more and I could not wait for the day, or night rather, they could sleep right through without needing to be fed. I missed unbroken periods of sleep. I was still somewhat tired when we finally rode into the Red Keep together. It was unusual for all of us to be in one place since our return to King's Landing. Corlys and Rhaenys often left to deal with problems arising from the rebuilding of Spicetown, but even if construction was running smoothly, Rhaenys had lived at high tide before the birth and Corlys spent most of his time in the keep or the docks fulfilling his role as master of ships. Joffrey, Laenor, Lena and I had our own business to attend to more often than not, as well with Joffrey's growing power in King's Landing, Laenor's training and studies, Lena's trips to Dragonstone and my own slow return to politics in the Red Keep proper. We garnered a lot of attention as we cut through the crowds. I think it was Ser Stefan that was the most eye-catching as he strode ahead of us, shoving aside any minor lord or knight that failed to get out of our way fast enough, but I knew that I had earned my fair share of startled second glances. My new style was still in service despite dropping a decent amount of the pregnancy weight in the past few months. Yet it wasn't my figure that was causing the surprise, it was the color of the clothing I had made especially for today. After all, I had not worn green since long before I was 14. The lords not used to the fast-changing allegiances of King's Landing were no doubt feeling out of their depth. So many had poured into the capital over the last few months, so many drawn by the chance of glory in war or simply still feeling the outrage that Otto had carefully cultivated until it spread through the Seven Kingdoms like an uncontrollable wildfire. Nobody wanted to risk missing the opening of the spectacle that would be the War Council. This part would be public at least. Father would rant and rail against the Dornish, lay out the reasons they needed to be brought to heel and officially invite those who would be his advisors in the coming months to join him privately. That's when the fun would really start. I should not be shocked or surprised that my father, king of parties, feast and tourneys, had managed to create such a spectacle out of a war council. As the king's oldest child and his heir apparent, I was given pride of place amongst the lords paramount that had arrived. Jane sat next to me with Laenor and the Valerians taking the seats to my other side. I ignored Borrow's somewhat sour looks as he took his place and especially ignored Rickon Stark's outright hostility. Lord Jason gave me a polite enough smile, as did Elmo Tully. None gave any such comforts to the last of the lords paramount to join us. As the Tyrells had declared themselves unable to attend due to their lord's sickness, the honor of last to arrive went to Hagen Greyjoy. He was an old man, but unlike Rickon Stark, age had not sapped at his physical form. He was tall, broad and looked as capable in a fight as the day he'd first lifted his axe. I had to admit, he had not been on my radar for allies. The Ironborn were a law unto themselves, fickle allies that would turn on you the moment you wavered, and their practice of thraldom was slavery by any other name. Truly, they disgusted me on so many levels. Hagen took in our studied indifference to his arrival and smiled, his lips peeling back to reveal black and rotting teeth. I had to force myself not to shudder as he made eye contact with me before he moved away and took his seat with a dark little chuckle. Laenor's fingers curled into mine and I could see the distaste in his features for all that he fought to disguise it. Corlys and his son saw the Greyjoys as little better than pirates, and neither were fond of pirates. Others began to file in behind us, creating enough noise that I felt brave enough to risk leaning across to whisper in his ear. "Let's not court the Greyjoys." His mouth twitched into a smile and he made a show of leaning into me to reply. "If I thought you'd go for it, I'd take sea smoke and burn their islands the moment you were crowned," he whispered. "That is very tempting. Oh gods, I am a bad person. Let's not start my reign off with the destruction of an entire culture," I told him. "It might send a bad message to the rest of my future subjects." "You spoil all of my fun," he sighed, and I really hoped he was just teasing. We settled back into our seats as the last of the lords piled in. It was amusing to note the standing room only at the back. Only the truly important lords had been given seats. The rest had been forced to elbow, cajole, and bribe their way to the front spots where they could get a good look at the proceedings. "Ah, Westeros, I hope I can do something to change you." The hissing and muttering fell silent as Alicent stepped out and almost seemed to glide to her smaller throne. She'd gone all out, I noted. Her black dress seemed to drink in the light of the throne room and only made the gems she wore, enough to buy a small city, seem all the more magnificent. The dress implied mourning to those not in the know, but to those who were, well, it was symbol that we were aligned in this at least. Her lords would note it and my path would become just a little easier. On the flip side, my dress was a signal to my lords that even if I resented the war with Dorne, they weren't to make targets of themselves by railing against it. She took her seat and smiled a practiced and very fake smile at those assembled. Yet Alicent, for all she'd decked herself out, was not the main event. The main event was my father. He strode out, accompanied by Ser Eric and Ser Eric Cargill. I had to hand it to whoever had dressed him because he was resplendent. Gone were the rich fabrics and plush outfits that he went to his parties in. Now he wore full plate, darkened as Rhaenys had been and inlaid with rubies that formed the three-headed dragon of our house. His crown, the crown of Jaehaerys Eye, was in place. It glinted in the light, the different colored jewels gleaming atop his silver hair. The contrast was pleasing to say the least. As a final touch, Blackfyre was strapped to his side and somehow even his mustache looked less silly as he stood before the throne and looked over his subjects with a grim face. "My lords," he started, and every eye in the room must have been riveted on him. "My lords, I have called you here today for war." Angry muttering broke out at that. Everyone knew how the Dornish had slain Alice Strong in a failed poisoning and Otto Hightower in a craven ambush in order to send Westeros to war and save themselves. I had no doubt Otto's recent rabble-rousing had left the events of the Dornish conquests well in mind for most of those present. I caught plenty of mutterings of the words will and Euler and even Martell. Poison was another favorite as well. "We did not choose this war," he shouted, and the room fell silent once more. "We did not. We chose peace. We chose diplomacy. We chose forgiveness." Yet the Dornish threw our magnanimity back at us. Like all their gifts, their offers of friendship were poisoned. They sought to slay my granddaughters in the womb. They slew the daughter of our Lord Hand. They slew my good father as he walked peacefully in the gardens. That got boos and hisses aplenty as the lords fell under his sway. I had to admit I had only ever seen one other person with the kind of showmanship and gift for speaking, and that was Patrek. "Enough, I say. It is time Dorne was brought to heel." Cheers of agreement rang out. "It is time they were humbled. Will you be the ones to do it, my lords? Will you ride with me into the deserts of Dorne and finish what the Conqueror started?" The answering roar of assent caused a smile to twitch over his face, but he quickly hid it. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.